Uhuru, I am Solyana, your very own managing editor for the Burning Spear newspaper.
Uhuru, comrades, I'm Dr. Mariah, promotions manager and volunteer at Black Power 96 Radio, bringing you the voice of our community to this panel.
You are now tuned into One Africa Worldview, the weekly news podcast bringing you revolutionary analysis on the day's top headlines. This show is a program of Burning Spear Media and is aired on the Burning Spear TV YouTube channel and Burning Spear Media on Rumble. Comrades, we are less than 2,000 subscribers, shy of 15,000, and we know we can get there by the end of this month with your assistance. So trust me, if you're just getting here, we have the courage to, have the tough discussions that this government and world colonial powers are trying to keep you from accessing, and we sum everything up from the African internationalist perspective, a theory developed by Chairman Amalia Shatella, leader of the Uhuru movement, which centers the issue of colonialism and the colonial mode of production as the leading cause of war, poverty, genocide, oppression, and exploitation we see experienced throughout the world. Today's show will be kicked off with the Whirlwind Weekly Update, then our primary objective, and concluded with For the Culture, where today we're talking about Tyler Perry's recent film, Straw. So with that, we can go ahead and move on to our next segment with our first headline. So on Friday, the 13th, the illegitimate white settler colonial state of Israel bombed Tehran, which is the capital of Iran. Israel targeted residences and other areas in Tehran for the purpose of assassinations. Israel announced a days or weeks-long military attack against Iran and has declared Decree 8, which calls up all Israeli reservists to participate in this attack. Israel also struck Natanz, which is the site of the Natanz nuclear facility. Iran's military commander-in-chief, Hossein Salami, two top Iranian nuclear scientists, and several high-ranking Iranian military officials were assassinated. Israel launched a third wave of attacks on Tabriz, Kermanshah, Shiraz, Khorramabad, and Tehran International Airport. 78 Iranians were killed and 329 were wounded. Iran retaliated with missile strikes within hours, hitting Tel Aviv. And this continues to be a really fast developing story with rumors that Netanyahu has fled Israel in the midst of, Iran's retaliatory bombings that have extensively penetrated Israel's quote unquote Iron Dome. And you're about to see a clip of surveillance footage capturing an Iranian missile strike in Petah Tikva, Israel. Yeah, so Iran hit central Israel with hypersonic missiles and drones, bypassing the much talked up Iron Dome with direct hits. Palestinians in occupied Palestine celebrated, and Yemen joined in with missiles of its own, and Netanyahu has allegedly fled to Greece and is hiding out there. Of course, the U.S. is, working with Israel, and the Trump administration supplied them with 500 Hellfire missiles. However, Trump indicated that he would take credit if Israel's attack against Iran was successful, and he would disavow it if it wasn't successful. So that's Trumpian logic for you there. And it turns out it hasn't been successful because Israel said the objective was to destroy Iran's nuclear program, but Iran is doing nuclear development. And at least 3 Israelis are dead from Iran's strong response, and reportedly hundreds of Israelis are injured. It's hard to get information on the Israeli casualties because Israel is censoring even its own citizens, Israelis, so they can't share the footage of the destruction. And Iran also stopped a British ship that was on its way to assist Israel. And Iran also has arrested an Israeli pilot, and it's reported that Iranian villagers helped in this arrest. Now, Iran's strong response also has resulted in thousands of Israeli settlers hiding in shelters. Iran has also hit the oil refinery in Haifa, which has done a lot of damage to Israel's fuel capacity. And this oil refinery was actually responsible for 60% of Israel's fuel capacity. So this is significant. Furthermore, Iran has done the most damage to Israel's military headquarters known as the Kiryat. And Iran also hit Israeli energy centers, petrochemical plant, and military occupation residences such as Rishon LeZion. Iran's response shows powerful anti-colonial resistance and exposes how vulnerable the Zionist entity really is, and it can't survive without U.S. support. Israel told Israelis to prepare for 2 weeks of war, where it planned to denuclearize Iran and topple the Iranian government. But Iran's military response has shown Israel's plan to really be farcical. And here's footage of some of the damage on several residential buildings in Bnei Brak, Israel. Yeah, so as of Sunday, June 15, just yesterday, the U.S. has announced withdrawing air defense systems from Ukraine to the Middle East, and the head of the Israeli intelligence organization resigned. Iran launched another offensive on Israel this morning, and from the Iranian offensive last night, part of the Yam area within Tel Aviv has been destroyed. Iran hit the port of Haifa and the Nevatim airbase. Iran severely damaging the Weizmann Institute of Science damaging the Institute of Science earlier prevents Israel from furthering development of AI, drone guidance, cyber defense, advanced weapons, and nuclear technology in general. And earlier this morning, the eighth wave of Iran's True Promise 3 destroyed another air launcher at Nevatim Air Base, and there have been reports of 3 Israelis dead because of a bomb shelter collapsing. Israelis writing on social media are saying that another week of this, and the Israelis will be back in the Stone Age. Some analyzing Israel's defenses report that if Iran keeps up 50 missiles a day, Israel will be completely defenseless after 18 days. Official statement from Iran is that leave the occupied territories. It's clear that this is a war that the colonizer cannot win. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a rapidly developing story, and we really do urge our listeners to, stay up to date with us and be wary of the way that, the bourgeois media is going to frame Iran's resistance.
Wow, and this is like you said, this is definitely one that the colonizer can't win. And looking over at Yemen, Yemen continues to take a powerful and principled action in defense of the Palestinian people against Israel's brutal genocidal slaughter in Gaza. Last month, Israel launched airstrikes on Yemen's Sinai International Airport and on power plant stations in Sinai. On June 10th, Israel attacked Yemen again, targeting the port in Hodeidah. In response, Yemen fired missiles at Ben Gurion Airport, causing the main Israeli airport to shut down. Yemen is steadfastly supporting the liberation struggle of Palestinians in Gaza and has actually stated that the attacks will continue until Israel ends its genocidal attacks. Yemen has also put out an official statement of solidarity with Iran, condemning Israel's attacks against Iran and stating support of Iran's right to respond to Israeli aggression and reaffirming Yemen's solidarity with the people of Gaza. And beginning in 2023, Yemen effectively ended the use of the Red Sea and the Suez Canal for commercial shipping. With its attacks on Israel-connected ships, U.S. President Donald John Trump launched a brief war on Yemen to open the canal, but the U.S. was defeated and backed down. Now all commercial container ships going between Asia and Europe have to take the much longer and more expensive route around the southern tip of Africa.
Right. And, continuing on this theme of, imperialist agendas and attacks, on May 28 and 29, U.S. Africa Command, or also known as AFRICOM, with the cooperation of the Kenya Defense Forces, held a conference titled the 2025 African Chiefs of Defense Conference in Nairobi, Kenya, the capital. It was attended by military commanders from approximately 37 African nations and by other leaders from Naval Forces Africa, Special Operations Command Africa, U.S. Air Forces Africa, and U.S. Army Africa. So all of these different military branches based in Africa. According to the AFRICOM website, the conference, quote, featured over 70 bilateral engagements, panel discussions with high-level civilian and military officials in Nairobi, and collaborative sessions to enhance regional cooperation, unquote. Now, we know what collaborative sessions to enhance regional cooperation means. It's just neocolonialism. And AFRICOM Commander General Michael Langley said, quote, this conference serves as a prime opportunity to communicate our renewed emphasis on warfighting and warrior readiness, something we have always aimed for but are putting even more effort on as we work together with our partners in Africa, unquote. Now, according to their website, AFRICOM coordinates all U.S. military operations, exercises, and security cooperation on the African continent in order to advance U.S. interests. In other words, to steal the vast resources of Africa that are so critical to U.S. wealth, especially the minerals needed in industry and technology, right? This is the sort of economic aspect of that white power and blackface as well that we're seeing with General Michael Langley sort of being this face of AFRICOM as an African man. And the news outlet Africa Stream, which was banned from YouTube, wrote this on X. They say this conference comes barely 5 weeks after AFRICOM commander General Michael Langley accused Burkina Faso's leader Ibrahim Traore of using the country's gold to consolidate power. His comments sparked outrage across the continent and the global African diaspora as events on the ground, such as economic growth, increased security capacity, and removal of colonial era barriers with Mali and Niger, all point toward leadership that is in tune with the people's wishes. Langley's statements were likened to consent manufacturing operations deployed against previous icons such as Muammar Gaddafi in the build-up to violent regime change operations. Africa Stream continues. The choice of Nairobi to host the AFRICOM conference is part of an embarrassing pro-imperialist pattern in Kenya. Kenyan police are currently in Haiti carrying out a U.S.-funded occupation mission. President William Ruto's administration has also been implicated in the destabilization of Sudan due to its close ties with the United Arab Emirates-backed proxy rapid support forces, fighting a destructive war against the Sudanese armed forces. AFRICOM and Nairobi may also share animosity against the alliance of Sahelian states, as President Ruto was a rare African voice who condemned the popular revolutionary coup against Western favorite Mohamed Bazoum in Niger, unquote. Indeed, neocolonialism was imposed in Kenya after the heroic Kenya Land and Freedom Army, also known as the Mau Mau, under the leadership of Dedan Kimathi, had liberated Kenya from formal British colonial control in 1963. And their battle cry was Uhuru, which, our movement has taken up, as Chairman Omale says, this time till it's won. The Uhuru movement, denounces all U.S. and imperialist intervention in Africa, and we are working towards the unification of the African nation, the dissolution of all colonially imposed borders, and the retaking of Africa's vast resources for the benefit of the African working class masses and Africans everywhere.
Wow. Well, just shifting gears a little, we'll look back over at St. Louis. And as St. Louis recovers from the colonial tornado that swept through the North Side African community, and I say colonial because the damn city forgot to hit the damn alert button, and leading to 7 of our elders' deaths. 7 people dead. And Trump is canceling FEMA during all of this, right after the hurricane season ends this year. And unsurprisingly, the St. Louis local government left us to fend for ourselves. And so under the leadership of the African Education and Defense Fund, the Northside St. Louis, we organize ourselves and clean up all the debris over there. And so the day after Trump announced he would wind down the FEMA, the head of FEMA's Disaster Command Center, the individual who actually coordinates the national response to these tornadoes, floods, earthquakes, and all the other disasters, submitted his resignation. And he wasn't alone because the other senior staffers, they all resigned as well. And today it's very, very clear that now more than ever before that we must take things for our own lives, our own destiny, our own future into our own hands. And that's why I'm a part of this organization and we need you. And you can visit apedf.org and get involved with the Northside Disaster Relief. Join us in creating a new world where we build for ourselves, because we can't afford another situation like what they did over to the African community over in Hurricane Katrina. And I spoke about that on episode 3. It's happening over and over again. And like I said, please join us. You can visit apedf.org and get more involved.
Uhuru, yeah, thank you so much for that update, Comrade Mariah. And yeah, so this does wrap up our Whirlwind Weekly Update section. And, as you've just heard, there's really a lot happening around the world. And, the common thread that we're seeing through all of this is, of course, the basis that is colonialism, right? This world economic and social system that we're living under that really does define the reality of, oppressed people throughout the world, right? Whether you're African, African, Mexican, indigenous, Iranian, Palestinian, right? This is the situation that we're in. And, what we've been seeing with Israel and Palestine, and what we're now seeing with, Iran and Israel, is just one, expression of this colonial system, that can't help but always lead to war and carnage for it to sustain itself, right? And this is because, we understand this colonial capitalist system to be this inherently violent process, right? And it's this process, this system that, favors and holds up the ruling class, the one percenters, the rich of the world, the colonizers, right, at the expense and at the, exploited labor and resources of the African working class and all colonized people. So when we see, war break out like this, it's because of this equilibrium. And we mentioned, what uneasy equilibrium is, as Chairman has defined it, right? This system that's been maintained or the system that's being maintained in this uneasy way because African people always, resist this system that they've been put under. This equilibrium that has been maintained has been, somehow upset or disturbed, right? So if we're to use like October 7th, 2023, like the media always likes to use that as a date when talking about the situation with Israel and Palestine, right? If we're to use October 7th, 2023 as an example, this was one moment among many that was a moment that disturbed and sort of disrupted this sort of status quo that's been imposed by colonialism because Palestinian people fought back, right? And this is the same thing that we see in Africa with the alliance of the Sahel states, right? Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger sort of striking out and saying that, the colonizers must go. This was a really crucial, huge and significant moment that is disturbing, that is disrupting, this obliterating this colonial process, the system. And of course, the colonizers, won't take this lying down, right? They will strike back and they will always, paint this just resistance of the people that we're seeing, this very legitimate resistance, as illegitimate or illegal or unjustified. And this, when we think about what gets deemed legal or illegal, and we understand that law is also this, what the ruling class is, thinks of, what Chairman says is, law is the opinion of the ruling class, right? So when you realize that, it's not surprising that these moments of resistance are painted as illegitimate or illegal, right? And so this is why we're seeing people like General Langley come out and say that, Ibrahim Traore is this corrupt leader that's taking advantage of Burkina Faso's gold, as if, the entity that perfected this exploitation was in the U.S. and the West and under colonialism, right? And so this is why we're seeing the sort of also the retrenchment of U.S. imperialist, designs in Africa with their recent conference that we just talked about. So again, when you sort of understand this fundamental exploitative relationship that African people and all colonized people have been locked into, it becomes clear, why we must not always declare solidarity with these, popular resistances, but also actively organize against the system, right? And I didn't mean to make this a call to join the party, but hey, this is the One Africa Worldview Podcast, led by the Burning Spirit TV, which is the organ of the African People's Socialist Party. So, join the African People's Socialist Party. We have chapters, units in, wherever you are located, because we do truly believe in organizing African people wherever we are located, because we understand that African people are African people. We are one dispersed nation, right? That is what unites us. That is what makes us who we are. I always like Chairman's quote, how can you get on the boat as an African and come off the boat as anything else, right? So if you understand that, you understand that our destinies are inherently linked. And so yeah, join wherever you are located. We are serious about that. But yeah, before we do move on to our primary objective, Comrade Mariah, did you want to add anything?
I do. When just going back to that unequal equilibrium that you discussed, that really is, you nailed it there, because that's a system that, it's a system of suffering. It's a system that's become normalized. It's where basically our inequality is stable, and we're just expected to really just deeply unjustly accept that. And and we can see, and we've talked about it before here on the podcast, that from all over, we can see Africans all over the globe on every continent. Right now there is a forced unbalanced, and that balance is being pushed. And it's not because of help, it's because we're doing it ourselves. And it's because things aren't fair, and because power has been organized at the bottom, and that's by our people. And I mean, that comes socially, that comes politically, it comes, I mean, even economically. And I mean, it's really something special to point out to me, because we know Africa, it's rich in the most resources. And I mean, Africans still remain some of the most poorest people all over the globe. And it's really that neocolonial control that we keep talking about. And I mean, there's Black workers all around that are underrepresented, the low wages, the high risk jobs that our people take. And it's just really that ownership that we're taking it back. And we go back to that unequal equilibrium, that system, we're not accepting that anymore. That system of the gentrification, the housing issues, all the environmental racism, even really that we spoke about. It's just something that when these conditions now are here, it's up to our people to, as we said, it's up to our people to fight back, and it's up to us to do it for ourselves. And I mean, that's something that we're doing globally, and that's something that certainly is powerful.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you, saying that and connecting all of those, things like, gentrification and, educational disparities, health disparities. I mean, when you look at any stat there is to be looked at, African people are always, facing the worst things, right? It's not an accident. It's not a fluke that, for example, like, infant mortality rates for Black women are always so much more, higher for Black women, Black children. Same thing with maternal mortality rates. And you can look at, statistics that measure poverty as well. And then even also talking about the sort of locations that we're put in, right? I mean, St. Louis, we just talked about, is a I think a really good example, and a really good example of what, like, the sort of conditions and areas that African people have been put into, because we see these replicated in other areas of the U.S. as well, right? We see gentrification happen. We see it. I'm local to D.C., so you see that happening in D.C. I mean, D.C. ain't no chocolate city no more, right? And like I said, you see this happening where African people are located, and the party having its base in St. Louis, and just becoming this example of like what African people can do when we are really united and have this, revolutionary organization on the ground that can that can really confront these very real issues that we see, whether it be through gentrification, whether it be through things like climate change, because we see these, quote unquote, natural disasters happen, or war happens, or whatever. These things that seem to be out of people's control really always will have African people suffer the brunt of it, right? And this is because the system already sort of created this situation where African people are placed to face that brunt of it, right? And that's why I really appreciate the 14-point platform, because the very first point of the 14-point platform, which is the African People's Socialist Party's, program, what we want, what we believe, the very first point says we want peace, dignity, and the right to build a prosperous life through our own labor and in our own interests. And that first point, I mean, the whole thing is great, but the first point really sort of encompasses everything else that comes comes next in the 14-point platform, talking about how we want the right to free speech, how we want the right of free association, and the ability to have a relationship with the natural world that allows us to create and recreate life for ourselves, but not for the people that have put us in this position where our labor benefits, the ruling class, benefits the colonizer, right? How can you thrive when the only thing that you have to sell, your labor, is going to benefit, not you or your immediate family, but again, the colonizers. And so I just really wanted to mention that. I feel like that's what your point made me think of. And also, like, thinking about, because we've heard, like, chairman talk about, like, the sort of different superstructures, right? So we understand this colonial system as its basis, and we have things like the media and education and law that then sort of reaffirms the ruling class, right? So we can't look to these sort of systems that further denigrates us, right? And so I just think what the party is doing, and African people resisting, will always sort of be painted as this aberration or something that needs to be put down, because again, it is against the interest of the system. And also, just wanted to add that millions of protesters across the U.S. Actually took to the streets in demonstration against the Trump administration on Saturday, in stark counter programming to the president's DC military parade that evening. It's funny because I'm local to DC, but this one weekend I was very much not in DC, so I missed that. But I'm not upset that I did. And more than 5 million people actually took in the No Kings demonstrations in over 2,100 cities and towns across the country, with an additional 300 Kick Out the Clowns rallies being held. And during a podcast ahead of Saturday's planned protest, Governor Ron DeSantis emphasized that Florida drivers have a right to defend themselves if they feel threatened. Now, the governor said drivers will not be held responsible if they hit protesters, which is insane. And he says this because, as long as it's because they are in fear for their safety. So, vehicular manslaughter, I guess, is okay in this particular instance, right? Again, talking about law being the opinion of the ruling class. This is a perfect example of that. And Brevard County Sheriff Wayne Ivey issued a harsh warning on Thursday to protesters who use violence in his county. He says, "We will kill you, graveyard dead." He continues, "Throwing a brick, a firebomb, or point a gun at one of our deputies, we will be notifying your family where to collect your remains at, because we will kill you, graveyard dead. We're not going to play." Right, so the mask is falling. Right, the colonizers no longer need to sugarcoat anything, and I feel like this is just an opening or an eye-opening moment. Which, I mean, again, if you've been paying attention to anything the media has been saying, or the way that the political parties have been conducting themselves ever since African people have been forcibly brought here, it's not super surprising that or it's that Trump is now sort of being so crass and sort of empowering other people and other politicians to be really crass. Has been this sort of eye-opening moment for a lot of people. But we understand that the system has always had this attitude for African people, right? They didn't need to say, we will kill you dead for us to believe that, because that's been the reality of African people, right? You don't need someone to smile at your face and treat you one way or another for you to not believe how they've been acting towards you, right? And so we understand the police were and have always been the aggressors, right? The terrorists. And the only thing that this moment is revealing is revealing it to other people who've never understood that, right? Who've never understood or who've never experienced what the police have been representing and have been doing to African people and colonized people, because we understand them to be, the armed forces of the colonial state. Whose interests are they protecting? It's damn sure not Africans. But yeah, is there anything else before we move on to our primary objective, Comrade Mariah?
Yeah, I'd like to say I do like that comment that the police were and have always been the aggressors. And like we said, they're the terrorists. The police are the terrorists here. And when it comes to these protests, that goes back to that unequal equilibrium that, we're not accepting what's being fed to us anymore. No. We're going to eat our own foods. So when it comes to that, just these protests, just seeing it, that is something beautiful. All these cities, all these people coming out, that shows you, like we said, the table's turning.
Mm-hmm. All right. Will you take us to our next primary objective section, Comrade Mariah?
Well, for our primary objective today, we want to bring to everyone's attention an announcement from Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, who declared that he will be launching an investigation into organizations he's accusing of funding the uprisings in LA as the chair of the Judiciary Committee on Crime and Terrorism. One of those organizations is Union del Barrio, the Mexican liberation organization based in California that the African People's Socialist Party has had a fraternal relationship with now for almost 40 years. And this is just the latest in an assault on anti-colonial free speech and resistance to colonial terror. Of course, the colonial state is not investigating itself for crimes of terrorism. No, it doesn't consider what happens to African and Mexican indigenous people at all terrorism. And Union del Barrio issued this official statement.
Uhuru, yeah. So Union del Barrio received an email on Wednesday, June 11, 2025. Attached to it was a PDF letter from the chair of the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Crime and Counterterrorism, Josh Hawley. The letter was directed to Compañero Ron Goches, identified as a spokesman of Union del Barrio. The content of Hawley's letter focused on spontaneous protests in Los Angeles that increased in number and intensity until Friday, June 6, when some of these protests escalated into clashes between federal agents, local law enforcement agencies, and civilian residents of Los Angeles. Two of these confrontations are the sources of the many videos and images that circulated the country and the globe. On one side, federal agents and local law enforcement fired projectiles such as tear gas canisters, pepper balls, rubber bullets, and flashbang grenades, while some protesters threw anything they could find at the agents. That day, there were dozens of arrests, various injuries, broken windows, multiple burning cars, and political graffiti, but no major injuries or deaths. Mr. Hawley's June 11th letter claims that Union del Barrio provided, quote, logistical and financial resources, aiding and abetting criminal conduct, unquote. To be clear, Union del Barrio has not organized, aided, abetted, financed, or engaged in any illegal activity, and we reject Mr. Hawley's notion that we are somehow responsible for lawless mob actions. Clearly, the objective of Mr. Hawley's letter was to intimidate us and compel Union del Barrio to stop organizing the self-defense of our communities, to silence our communities into submission, and to rewrite history as to who are the actual violent criminals behind these events. Through our words and actions, we proudly say that he has failed. Anyone who cares to pay attention has witnessed how these protests were rooted in a rapidly growing number of intentionally cruel, increasingly violent, militarized immigration operations across the United States. These Los Angeles protests took place as a direct response to the ongoing 159-day colonial reign of terror unleashed by the federal government of the United States against La Raza. This campaign began on January 7, 2025, in Bakersfield, California, when 65 Border Patrol agents initiated Operation Return to Sender by violently detaining 80 Central Valley farm workers. Since that day, tens of thousands of federal agents from the Border Patrol, as well as ICE, HSI, ERO, DEA, FBI, USCIS, CBP, U.S. Marshals, ATF, USPIS, TSA, and the IRS have deployed across the United States to harass and repress our barrios, workplaces, schools, churches, medical centers, restaurants, court proceedings, social gatherings, and public events. During these 159 days, agents reassigned from positions across the entire U.S. federal government were redeployed to our communities with long weapons and orders to snatch our people off of streets, smash windows, kick down doors, overrun workplaces, imprison people without due process, separate families, and destroy entire communities. Many of these federal agents began wearing masks because they were, well aware of the true nature of what they were doing to us. This is while local law enforcement agencies, as well as private for-profit organizations and civilian MAGA supporters, are invited to contribute to this reign of terror. For 159 days and counting, La Raza, con y sin papeles, is being attacked as a primary target of what is clearly a civilian army deployed against our communities. This federalized national campaign to terrorize La Raza was set to enter its next phase during the first week of June 2025. White House officials announced that Los Angeles would be the largest of several cities subjected to a massive increase in immigration operations, aiming to achieve a daily quota of 3,000 deportations. This aggressive intervention into LA was also designed to redirect national attention away from the Musk, Epstein, Trump scandal and the increasingly unpopular Big Beautiful National Spending Bill. The repression in Los Angeles featured a dramatic increase in immigration raids throughout the city, organized as made-for-media spectacles to be used to satiate Trump, Miller, and MAGA supporters. Within days, a statewide labor leader was arrested. The governor of the state and mayor of LA were threatened with arrest, and a U.S. senator was roughed up during a press conference. This is the true story about the source of ongoing state violence that abetted the Los Angeles protests of June 2025. Another truth is that this war against La Raza suffered its first major setback as a consequence of the mass outpouring of people's rage and resistance in Los Angeles. This setback is why the White House ordered the California National Guard and active duty Marines to occupy Los Angeles, thereby formalizing the transition from a much publicized, law enforcement campaign into a violent military action against the civilian population within the current borders of the United States. Within this context, we take Mr. Hawley's letter as a threat against our organization, our members, and the movement. In a related police action during the morning of June 12, 2025, the FBI, National Guard, and other agencies raided the home and arrested a member of Central CSO Alejandro Orellana, claiming that he provided some form of illegal material support to protesters in LA. While commenting on this police action on social media, the U.S. Attorney emphasized that Orellana's arrest is the first of more to come. We understand that similar lies could be used as an initial step towards a more substantive legal/political intervention or other repressive measures against more of our compass or our compas. We call on our members and supporters to demand that all charges against Alejandro be dropped immediately. Union del Barrio is a disciplined organization with a politically united membership that acts collectively, not as individuals. Our members participated and continue to participate in protests throughout the LA area and Southern California. And furthermore, we intend to play a leading role in a national movement against ICE migra attacks. Union del Barrio has already provided an effective model for community self-defense, and we are putting our theories into practice. We have informed our members and supporters of the situation, and we have instructed them to remain on high alert in response to ongoing ICE migra repression. However, we will remain steadfast. Union del Barrio will continue to expand, strengthen, and increase our community-centered barrio-facing work, such as our community patrols and our youth, prisoner, worker, and mujer-centered projects to build dual and contending power. Unlike Mr. Hawley, Union del Barrio has hundreds of thousands of supporters to express their admiration and support for what we are doing every day, and we will not run away nor abandon them, nor will we be intimidated or shamed into silence. We will continue to organize in our barrios because we only answer to our communities and we are accountable to the movimiento en la raza. The colonizers have attempted to silence us for over 500 years and they have failed. We are a part of that legacy of struggle, and we will not stop organizing until the ICE kidnapping stop, until the deportation stop, and until we have self-determination and freedom here in our historic homeland. To the courageous gente of Los Angeles who are resisting every day, to Nuestro Pueblo from Chicago to New York City, Texas y Arizona, the Northeast, and back to San Diego, Union del Barrio shares your anxiety about how many of our families are unaware of the whereabouts of their loved ones. We feel the pain they are inflicting on our most vulnerable community members, our elders, and our children. This physical and psychological terror against our gente is meant to not only squash our fighting spirit and turn back the self-defense of our barrios, but also to erase the political clarity in knowing that we are indigenous peoples and we have the universal right to migrate freely across our ancestral homelands. Our slogans of "We didn't cross the border crossed us," "Esta es mi tierra, esta es mi lucha," "Migra policía, la misma porquería," "Somos un pueblo sin fronteras," and "El pueblo unido jamás será vencido" are crystal clear political statements that these gringo settler colonialists wish we would abandon from our basic principles. We can't accept living in eternal fear, and we do not ask permission or offer apologies for defending our communities and families. History is on our side. Today, more than ever, we have the moral authority and the universal right to defend our people. Los Angeles has become a real example of mass-based resistance to Trump's anti-Gaza agenda, and the eyes of the entire country and the world are on LA right now. Trump, his lackeys, and the polymigra state repression in general, the colonial oppressors and the entire system, have as their primary goal to crush the bold spirit of resistance of our gente. We say chale, we will continue advancing our struggle for self-defense in our barrios, barrio por barrio, cuadra por cuadra, organizante y lucha, ni un paso atrás. Hasta la victoria siempre venceremos. What a great letter.
Wow, wow, wow. We unite with our comrades of Union del Barrio and stand shoulder to shoulder with them in the struggle against colonialism. Our comrades of Union stood with us in our ongoing battle against the U.S. government when they raided us on July 29th of 2022 and made our chairman, Amalia Shatella, and the Uhuru 3 stand trial for bogus charges of being Russian agents. Now, they're attempting to use that same terrorism label as a means of justifying attacks on anti-colonial speech and organizing because it's work that's meant to contend with the existence of the colonial mode of production. And because organizations like the APSP and Union refuse to surrender the fates of our entire people to the colonizer because we refuse slavery, genocide, land theft, and exploitation, we become targets. But just as they were unsuccessful in the case of the Uhuru 3, they will fall in this latest effort too.
Yeah, and speaking of which, the attorneys for the Uhuru 3 will officially be filing the appeal to overturn the bogus conspiracy to act as Russian agents conviction, because while the verdict was not what the U.S. government were gunning for, and the sentencing leaned more in favor of our movement, the fact still remains that all of the charges were bogus to begin with. If you recall, on December 16 of 2024, the Uhuru 3 were not sentenced to prison on the contradictory verdict that was handed down by a jury from the Uhuru 3 trial that began and ended in September of 2024. But they received probation and 3 hours of community service, which the judge acknowledged that they could do, standing on their heads because, community service is the ethos of the African People's Socialist Party, right?
Wow. And just speaking of this, this appeal filing will serve as a precedent-setting legal document that challenges U.S. law designed to attack contending voices. And we will actually cover this latest development in the Uhuru 3 case and more in our next week's episode. So anything more we want to say about this before we get into our next segment?
Just that, yeah, definitely stay tuned for our next episode where we'll dive a little bit deep into this. We'll also have a great piece running on our July Spirit that will also sort of summarize everything that's been happening, and what the appeal process is looking like, how people can help in that. If there's anything that if there's one thing you should know about the Uhuru movement is there's always something to do for you to get involved, right? We want you to take action in any way that your capacity will allow. So, definitely stay tuned with our next episode and, get your own copy of the Spear delivered right to your doorstep at, theburningspear.com/subscribe. You can also visit our website, theburningspear.com, to get your news. You can also just get a digital subscription if you want to be paperless. I mean, I know that's in trend right now. So we're, very much accessible. So that's all I wanted to add. But yeah, if there's nothing else, I think we can move on to our For the Culture segment of our show, where we're actually reviewing Straw, the latest Tyler Perry film available on Netflix. So, Comrade Dr. Mariah, take it away.
Sure. Well, this week during our For the Culture, we're diving into the latest Tyler Perry film, Straw. And this is a film, it's got folks talking. And from the barbershops to the beauty salons, from group chats to blogs, everyone's weighing in on this one. And whether you're a ride or die Tyler Perry fan or one of his loudest critics, Straw really demands some attention here. And now we're not going to actually spoil the story for you, but here's the setup. Basically, Straw centers on Janiyah Wilkinson, played masterfully by Taraji P. Henson. And on the surface, she has it all together. I mean, at least it remains composed. But beneath that calm exterior, Janiyah, she's holding a lifetime of unspoken pain. And she's the kind of Black woman we all know, the one who holds it down for everyone else, but rarely gets that space to fall apart for herself. And this film, it's about the moment when she can't hold it together anymore, and the moment she breaks. And we have Tiana Taylor also, who plays a police officer, Detective Raymond, a truth teller who really lives out loud and refuses really to bite her tongue. And emotionally, she's kind of rough around the edges, but she's got her root in love. And her character really, really speaks to spark to some of the tension that Janiyah has been avoiding really for years. And then we have Sherry Shepherd also, who brings depth as Nicole Parker is her character. She's a church-going, gossip-loving, old-school, anti-type bank worker, actually, that, I mean, she means well, but she still carries some of that same generational trauma that she recognizes in Janiyah. So together, this ensemble, I mean, it really tells a story that's not just about one woman, but really about a system. And from an African internationalist perspective, Straw really shows how colonial trauma, capitalism, and patriarchy just collides in everyday lives of our African people, and particularly working class Black women. And while not a direct adaptation, Perry has actually mentioned that the film is inspired by the struggles of people who feel, quote, not being acknowledged and not being represented. He also drew inspiration from the song $20 by Angie Stone, which tells the story of a woman seeking to help really just feed her baby. And the film explores themes of desperation, societal neglect, and it really just goes to how the links that people will go to when pushed to their limits. And I mean, reflecting Perry's own experience really in observations. And again, not to spoil it, but the film's ending really adds even a whole nother layer of complexity to that actual narrative. And I mean, this time, Tyler Perry really pulls back the curtain and says, this is what emotional violence looks like when it's normalized. And I mean, since just looking at some strengths that we saw in the movie is, of course, Taraji P. Henson. I mean, she really delivers, and her performance, I mean, it's layered, it's got that nuances, it's actually really, really, really unforgettable. And I mean, you feel it, you feel her fatigue, you feel that fear, you feel her fire. And then we have Tiana Taylor, and I mean, she really, really surprises us with some really true emotional depth in her performance. I mean, her character really brings that unfiltered look at, I mean, true energy, and I mean, just you recognize it in so many people you know. And then we have Sherry Shepherd, and she's that relatable and, you know, that rooted character. And her performance, it adds that levity. And I mean, it also gives support to Janiyah's character. And I mean, listen, for Tyler Perry, I mean, the writing feels a lot more grown up, and the themes, they dig deeper. I mean, there's less of that melodrama, and I mean, there seems like a lot more intention here. And when it comes to Janiyah's story itself, especially when it comes to her health, her mental health in particular, it really speaks to real life. I mean, you'll recognize your mama, you'll recognize your sister. I mean, maybe some of yourself in these characters. And just looking at some of the critiques there, we saw that, you know, some of the same stuff, that the cinematography feels rushed in places, like Perry's classic wrap it up in a week approach showed up behind the camera. And some of our characters, especially Janiyah's co-workers and friends, you know, some people were saying that, hey, they felt kind of undeveloped and they needed some more depth there. And, you know, we want more from them, but it seems like they kind of came into some too fast and they were going too soon too also. And one of these I do have to highlight, it was actually played by comedian Sinbad. So it was exciting to see him, you know, doing his craft. And I mean, and then another critique is, I mean, overall, the movie itself, it's really emotionally heavy. I mean, the trauma, it hits early on in the beginning and it comes often. And I mean, and for some viewers, they just kept mentioning like they felt overwhelmed almost like there was no breather. But I mean, just overall, the whole public reaction there is, I mean, people were really split. But one thing is, nobody's ignoring it. And I mean, some saw Straw as Tyler Perry's actually most honest and most emotional, mature film even yet. And others feel like it's still stuck in that Black woman suffers formula we've seen over and over before. But whether people love it or critique it or whatever, one thing's for clear, it's certainly it's moving people. And I mean, it touches on things that we don't always see out loud, is that emotional labor, those generational scars that we talked about, the really that mental health, and really what it takes to actually heal. And I mean, just kind of, you know, wrapping it up there as far as, you know, I did watch it. And I mean, I would say myself that Straw, I didn't watch it just as a movie. It was starting to become almost, like I said, a mirror, really. And it's a story that it happens when, it shows what happens when the weight of the world falls on one woman's shoulders. And I mean, it also shows what happens when that woman stops carrying it. And I mean, it opens up the door to so many different kind of conversations we can have here about mental health, the boundaries, just setting those boundaries, healing, grief, and I mean, just all the systems that really, really push Black people to the edge. And I mean, hey, of course, the story, it's not perfect, but I can't say it's powerful. And I mean, it's really got folks talking, as we say. And hey, in a world that keeps telling us to hold it in and hold it together, straw just really kind of shows us what happens when people let it out. And I mean, that happens when they finally let it out. So yeah, that's Tyler Perry's Straw. And have you got a chance to check it out yet, Solyana? And anything you want to add?
Yeah, we watched it just like a few hours before the show. Definitely wanted to get that in, to talk a little bit about it. And I appreciate, your synopsis. I think it was really good. I think you captured kind of how it's being received as well. And, I don't want to say like I enjoyed it, because it's one of those movies. It's like, well, you can't really like sort of enjoy it, right? Like you mentioned how it's a sort of mirror, but it and things do get sort of not necessarily dramatized in film, but there's this level of like of stakes that gets raised in movies, and you might be like, geez, like how many bad things can go wrong in one sort of day, right? But I do think at the very least the film does sort of show the sort of precarious position that African people are in, working class African people are in on a day-to-day basis, right? So you see, Janaya, the main character, just face all of these, have these class contradictions. Like she can barely make rent, and that touches how she's not able to, feed her daughter. Like she literally has to worry about when her daughter's going to eat next. And add on top of that, the sort of the health conditions that her daughter is facing, and how and then that sort of touches on this, Black people in the medical field, and how, that has always been a contentious relationship, because the medical field has never, taken African people's, pain seriously. And I think it touches on a lot of things. And I know Tyler Perry is like known for, like having Black actors in his film, but I was really trying hard to like remove, the fact that it was African people that were in this position, that were like, as cops and as teachers and as social workers, that sort of became the face of the state. And I'm not trying to say that Tyler Perry is trying to say that, but I was really like sort of struggling watching that, like watching African people sort of, and I don't know, it sort of changes at the end, but at the beginning, or like most of the movie, like you see no other than like her coworker, every other African person that she encounters just has no level of like empathy, no moment of like of solidarity, or like, hey sister, like I understand what you're going through. You don't get not one bit of that until the end, when it becomes a sort of political question of like free Janaya, after they hear her talk about like the kind of day that she's had, right? This snapshot of a day that they got to see has been her life for God knows how long, right? And I mean, it also sort of speaks to the title of the movie, Straw, right? Like this was like the last straw, like the fact that, she couldn't even feed her daughter, and all of these things went wrong, was just the last straw. Like it broke the character. But it wasn't even something that just sort of like happened, even though it might be received as like, oh, like she just lost it, right? They don't really see the sort of this compounding sort of thing that she was facing, and yeah. And so again, that I struggled with that. I guess it's a sort of critique that I have for the film, but I know Tyler Perry is known to, again, like, recruit Black actors and have Black actors in these various things. But that I did take a problem with that, like personally, like I didn't like that. It wasn't until, again, we have these pockets of moments where we see empathy and understanding and solidarity with Taraji P. Henson's character. And so that was, one thing. And then I guess a more like, what's it called? Logistical sort of comment I did have. So I did like it, at least how it was shot, in the sense of like, there were a lot of scenes where you're sort of brought in close with Taraji P. Henson's character, where like when she's like having these, really intense moments, like you're like, the camera is almost like the frame is like all of her face, and so you see all these expressions, you see like the creases on her face. So I think it really brings you in that way. So I think cinematography wise, I think those were good choices that were made. But I do think it's a film that I need to reflect on a bit more and have more of a fleshed out thought, because like I said, I just watched it right before we went live. But yeah, I do appreciate this discussion. But yeah, so Before we head over to the wrap up with Comrade Dr. Mariah, I want to, really salute all of those that make this show possible. Of course, us, our fabulous hosts, Dr. Mariah, myself, and Director Kile and Jenaba. We have our prep team and engineers, our headline writers over with the Burning Spear Media News Department. I do want to give a particular salute to Comrade MQ, who just was rapid fire giving us updates about what was going on with Iran and Israel. So, making us, on point. We also want to salute our video editors and post-production crew for, without whom this show would not have been possible. We, of course, appreciate all our viewers, and thank you for taking a moment to like, subscribe, and get us closer to our 15,000 subscriber goal. So with that, I'm going to head off to you, Comrade Dr. Mariah.
Yeah, Uhuru, I do want to go back because I saw the comment about John Q. And does this seem like a remake of John Q? I just want to just real quick there. Yes, as far as we saw John Q, that father, he was in the hospital, struggling there. Same thing as far as, Taraji's character, Janiyah, she's struggling there as far as her and it just shows that same state violence, that economic injustice, and just really that emotional trauma that we're seeing. So yeah, that was a really good question. I wanted to address that. Now, just moving along to our wrap-ups here. Now, on Saturday, June 21st at 3 p.m. Eastern, the Hands Off Uhuru Defense Campaign is hosting a webinar with major updates from the Uhuru 3 file appeal. The Uhuru 3 attorneys will be on this webinar for a report on our precedent-setting appeal filed on June 16th. There will also be reports on the tornado devastation in North St. Louis, the release of Indigenous freedom fighter Leonard Pethier with lead attorney Jennifer Jones and Kalanji Changa of the Leonard Pethier Official Support Committee. Also a report from the South American Hands Off Uhuru Committee with Paula and Ann, and a report back from the recent Cuba trip with African National Women's Organization President yesterday. Register at handsoffuhuru.org/register. That's handsoffuhuru.org/register. And on Wednesday, June 25th at 6:30 p.m. Central, join the African People's Solidarity Committee, the white solidarity organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, for their event looking at the root causes of climate change and how you can be part of the solution under the leadership of the African Revolution. Colonialism is destroying the environment, and why self-determination for African indigenous people is a climate solution. This event is being held in person at the Uhuru Solidarity Center in St. Louis at 2654 Gravois Avenue and online at the same time. You can reserve your spot over at apscuhuru.org/register. That's apscuhuru.org/register. And on Saturday, July 26, 2025 at 1 p.m. Eastern, the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back Coalition presents When We Fight, We Win, 3 years after the FBI raids on Uhuru movement. Join us on the 3rd anniversary of the brutal FBI police raids on 7 homes and offices of the Uhuru movement in 2 cities as we hear messages of support and solidarity from numerous organizations and individuals who have stood with Chairman Amalia Chitela and the Uhuru movement throughout. Join the fight back to fund the legal defense to appeal the bogus conspiracy conviction. And you can register for that over at handsoffuhuru.org/Uhuru3. That's handsoffuhuru.org/Uhuru3. And that's it for what's coming this week. Don't forget to visit theburningspear.com/events calendar to see everything that's happening and upcoming. That's theburningspear.com/events.
All right. Thank you so much, Comrade Mariah, for taking us through that. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and join us again on One Africa Worldview next week at 5 p.m. Eastern on the Burning Spear TV, YouTube, and Burning Spear Media Rumble channels. And with that, One Africa, One Nation. Uhuru.